Welcome back, everyone. Get ready to dive deep into the world of man-made fiber textiles in India.
Sounds fascinating.
It is. We're going to be dissecting a 2021 report from the Ministry of Textiles.
Okay.
And get this, the report's mission is to figure out how India can become a major player, a real powerhouse in the MMF textile game. It's pretty amazing to think that.
It is.
India is already the world's second largest producer of polyester fiber and filament.
Wow.
But this report is saying, hold on, there's still a ton of room to grow.
So where do they suggest we even begin?
Well, the report starts by zooming out, putting this all into a global perspective.
Okay.
Global fiber consumption is steadily increasing, and MMS is taking up a larger and larger chunk of that pie.
Makes sense.
Back in 2016, it already accounted for 72%.
72%.
I know, right? A pretty big slice.
Oh.
And then within that MMF world, synthetic fibers are really calling the shots.
Right.
They make up a whopping 64% of all MMF consumption. But here's what's really interesting. Emerging economies seem to be driving this demand for MMF more than developed countries.
That's interesting.
It's a shift from the historical patterns.
It is. And that shift is where India's potential really comes into focus, I bet.
Exactly. And the report highlights how India already has some serious strength in the textile sector.
Like what?
Especially when it comes to spinning. The spinning industry in India is pretty modernized and organized, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And I read that India is super competitive in spinning, particularly in yarn production.
Okay, so spinning's a strong suit.
But then the report takes a turn,
Oh.
and points out some weaknesses that are holding the industry back.
I see.
And one of the big ones is weaving.
Weaving.
A lot of weaving operations, it seems, are unorganized and rely on outdated technology. Get this, a staggering 95% of looms are outdated.
95%.
That's what the report says.
Wow.
So imagine this, right? You have this high-tech spinning mill creating this top-quality yarn. Okay. Only to have it sent to a weaving facility using looms from like half a century ago.
Oh, wow.
It's a real bottleneck.
Yeah, that would be.
And processing is another area that needs attention. It suffers from a lack of modern technology too, which means India ends up having to import a lot of high-quality processed fabrics.
Okay.
What's interesting here is that the report really emphasizes this lack of scale in weaving and processing as a major factor affecting India's competitiveness.
So they're lagging behind technologically, and that's hurting them.
Exactly. It's like having all these amazing ingredients, but lacking the proper tools to create a culinary masterpiece,
Right.
But despite these challenges, the report seems pretty optimistic about India's position in the MMF trade game.
Really?
There's one statistic that really caught my attention.
What's that?
India's textile export basket in 2019 was still tilted towards cotton, 45% compared to MMF at 30%.
Okay.
Which, made me wonder, are those weaknesses in weaving and processing that we talked about holding MMF back?
That's a good question. Does the report address that?
It does, and it kind of suggests they might be, at least in the export market. But there's another side to this. It's important to look at the growth trajectory.
Okay.
MMF exports are actually growing at a much faster pace, a 2.9% compound annual growth rate,
Wow.
compared to a measly 0.28% for cotton.
So even though cotton is still a bigger part of their exports, MMF is gaining ground quickly.
Exactly. This suggests the global demand for MMF is increasing, which of course presents a great opportunity for India. And to delve a bit deeper into this, the report analyzes something called India's revealed comparative advantage.
Revealed comparative advantage.
Yeah, it sounds a bit jargony, I know. But imagine you're playing a game of economic strategy,
Okay.
and you're trying to figure out where India has a natural advantage on the world stage. That's essentially what revealed comparative advantage helps to identify.
Ah, I see.
And according to the report, MMF yarns, fibers, and technical textiles are some of India's strongest suits.
Interesting. So the potential for growth in the global market is definitely there.
Definitely.
But what about within India itself? Are Indian consumers embracing MMF?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And the report tackles it head-on with some interesting survey data. What I found really reassuring is that most MMF manufacturers seem to be aware of consumer preferences, although there's always room for improvement, I guess. And the report makes a key point that, as a consumer, you might find interesting.
What's that?
There's a growing demand for MMF products. They're predicting like a 12.17% increase.
Wow, that's significant.
But the deciding factors for consumers, still price and personal preference.
Right, that makes sense. People care about how much things cost and whether they actually like them.
Exactly.
So Indian manufacturers can't just focus on ramping up production.
Right.
They need to prioritize things like innovation and marketing to meet the evolving needs and desires of Indian consumers.
Absolutely. It's about creating products that people actually want and that they can afford.
Makes sense.
The report also breaks down the different marketing channels that MMF units are using. And interestingly, there's a difference in focus between, weaving and ready-made garments, RMG as they call it.
RMG, right.
It seems weaving focuses more on the domestic market, while RMG is heavily geared towards exports. But as with any industry, there are challenges to overcome.
Definitely. Nobody gets a free pass. What does the report say about the hurdles facing the MMF sector in India?
Well, for starters, competition is fierce, particularly from China. And then there's the issue of cost competitiveness, right?
Right.
Raw material prices, capital costs, this power costs, it all adds up and it can make it really tough to compete on a global scale.
Yeah, for sure.
And let's not forget about that technological gap we talked about, those outdated looms. India needs to catch up with global leaders in technology, especially in weaving and processing, to really level the playing field.
Yeah, it sounds like those looms are a major sticking point.
But they really are. But it's not just about the technology.
Right.
There's also the human element.
Of course, the people.
The report flags a lack of skilled manpower and ongoing labor issues as pretty critical challenges.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can have the most advanced machinery in the world,
Right.
but without skilled workers to operate and maintain it, you're not going to get very far.
Exactly. It's like having a Formula One race car but no driver who knows how to handle it.
Perfect analogy.
It seems like there's this whole complex web of factors that need to be addressed for India to truly become a powerhouse in the MMF textile world.
It does sound complex.
Yeah.
But are there any bright spots? What does the report say about potential opportunities for India's MMF future?
Okay, so let's shift gears and talk about those opportunities. One of the biggest ones is that the global demand for MMF textiles is expected to keep growing, especially for sustainable and innovative products. And this is where India can really capitalize on its strengths, I think.
Definitely. And remember, they're already a leading polyester producer. So it seems like they're in a prime position to become a major sourcing hub for international brands looking to diversify their supply chains.
Yeah.
Maybe move away from China.
Exactly. It's a win-win situation. But beyond those established markets, there's also a whole world of untapped potential in new markets through regional value chain integration. The report specifically mentions BIMSTEC countries, along with Vietnam, as promising areas for expansion.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about building strategic partnerships and using existing strength to tap into those new markets.
Exactly. But to make all this happen, concrete action is needed.
Right, they need a plan.
And that's where the report's recommendations come in. It lays out this whole roadmap for growth, with specific policy measures to tackle those challenges and seize those opportunities.
So it's like a strategic game plan for India's MMF future. But for those of us who aren't textile experts, what are the key takeaways? What does this roadmap actually look like in practice?
That's a great question, and that's what we'll unpack in part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
So we left off talking about the report's recommendations, this roadmap for India's MMF future.
Right. The strategic game plan.
One of the most impactful ones, it seems, is the call for a fiber-neutral policy.
Fiber neutral.
Yeah, because currently the tax and duty structure in India favors cotton over MMF.
So it's like giving cotton a head start.
Exactly. And the report argues that by leveling the playing field, removing that bias, India could really unlock the potential of the MMF sector.
Makes sense. What else?
Then there's the urgent need for technology upgrades, especially in those areas we talked about earlier.
Weaving and processing?
Right. You remember those outdated looms?
How could I forget? 95%.
It's crazy. Modernizing the technology is crucial, not just for boosting the quality of products, but also for making the whole process more efficient so Indian manufacturers can actually compete on a global scale.
Efficiency is key.
Absolutely. And the report also stresses attracting foreign direct investment, FDI, and promoting joint ventures in MMF textiles. Specifically, they point to technical textiles.
Technical textiles. Now, that's something I'm not too familiar with.
Me neither, to be honest, but it sounds pretty high-tech.
It does.
Essentially, they're these high-performance materials designed for specific technical applications, not just for fashion. So things like medical textiles, protective gear, even the geotextiles used in construction.
Oh, I see. So it's the specialized side of textiles.
Yeah, and high-value products. The report sees a real opportunity for India to become a global leader in this space.
Interesting.
And, of course, to support that kind of growth, you need a skilled workforce.
Right. You can't just have the fancy machines without the people who know how to use them.
Exactly. The report recommends these targeted training programs to bridge the skill gap. Invest in people as much as in machines.
That's smart. A holistic approach.
And speaking of strategy, the report also dives into market intelligence and trade promotion. It's about making sure that Indian MMF manufacturers are doing their homework, understanding the market, knowing their customers, making sure the world knows what India has to offer.
Marketing smarts, basically.
Exactly. So, all in all, the report paints a pretty comprehensive picture of the path forward for India's MMF sector. But, this report was published back in 2021, and we're now in 2025.
Right.
Have we seen any of these recommendations come to fruition? Any notable developments in the Indian MMF landscape?
That's a great question. It would be interesting to see how things have progressed. I don't have the latest data on hand.
Me neither, to be honest. But it's something to think about.
Definitely.
Even without those updates, this report gives us a really valuable framework for understanding the MMF sector in India.
It does. Lots of moving parts, lots of factors influencing its success.
It's like a tapestry.
A tapestry.
Woven from these economic threads, technological innovations, and the aspirations of millions of people. And within that tapestry, the MMF sector, it stands out. It's a vibrant thread with the potential to really contribute to India's economic growth, its global standing.
A powerful image.
And the question is, will India seize the opportunity? Will they weave that thread into a masterpiece?
That's the question, isn't it? The report itself raises an interesting point that we haven't touched on yet.
Oh, what's that?
It strongly advocates for developing these mega MMF textile parks in India.
Mega MMF textile parks. That sounds ambitious. What are they envisioning exactly?
Essentially, these would be large-scale, integrated textile production zones designed specifically for MMF manufacturing facilities. Imagine hubs where the entire production chain, from fiber to finished fabric, could be concentrated.
So like mini cities dedicated to MMF textiles.
In a way, yes. The report argues that by concentrating resources, expertise, infrastructure in these dedicated zones, India could achieve economies of scale, attract foreign investment, foster innovation.
That is bold. It seems like it could address some of the challenges we discussed, like that lack of scale hindering competitiveness in weaving and processing.
That's one of their main arguments. These mega MMF textile parks could provide the space, the infrastructure, the collaborative environment to modernize those downstream processes.
Sounds like it could be a game changer. But any large-scale initiative like that, I imagine there are downsides to think about too. What are some of the concerns?
Well, with any big development project, the environmental impact is a major concern. These parks need to be designed with sustainability in mind from the get-go if they're going to be truly sustainable.
Absolutely. It can't just be about economic growth. It has to be responsible. It can't come at the cost of the planet.
Couldn't agree more. And beyond the environmental concerns, there are social and economic ones too, like the impact on smaller players in the industry.
Right. Could these mega MMF textile parks end up pushing out those smaller producers who maybe can't compete in those large-scale ecosystems?
That's a valid concern, and it's something policymakers would need to address very carefully. Perhaps mechanisms could be put in place to support those smaller players, help them integrate into the parks, or ensure they can coexist alongside the bigger ones.
It's about balance, right? Promoting growth and innovation, but also making sure the benefits are shared fairly and the environmental and social impacts are carefully considered.
Exactly. The report acknowledges that these mega MMF textile parks are not a magic solution. They're a tool that could accelerate growth, but they need to be implemented thoughtfully with a focus on sustainable and inclusive development.
So, lots of potential, but also potential pitfalls to be mindful of.
Definitely.
This deep dive has given me a lot to think about. The complexities of the MMF textile industry in India, the global market, the challenges and opportunities. It's fascinating.
It is. And we've seen how one report can spark so many questions, so many considerations.
It's amazing how much insight and food for thought can be packed into a single document.
It speaks to the power of research and analysis to shed light on complex issues, guide strategic decision-making.
Well said. I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
It has been a fascinating exploration.
Thank you for joining us. As always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, keep diving deep into the topics that spark your curiosity. Until next time.
So these mega MMF textile parks. Kind of a bold idea, right?
It is ambitious. The report really pushes for them, though.
Yeah, it seems like they could be a potential game changer, especially when you think about some of the challenges we've talked about.
Right, like that lack of scale.
Exactly. Creating these large-scale parks, it could help India overcome that, become more competitive in weaving and processing, which are, those weak links we talked about.
That's the thinking. Concentrate resources, expertise, bring in modern infrastructure,
Yeah.
create these dedicated zones specifically for MMF production.
So it's not just about expanding, it's about creating a whole new approach.
That's right. Foster innovation, attract more foreign investment, really put India on the map in the MMF world. I can see how it could be appealing. But, with any big initiative like this, I always wonder about the potential downsides. What are some of the things we need to be cautious about?
Well, the environmental impact, for one, that's a big one. Any large-scale development, you have to be mindful of the environment.
Right, it can't just be about economic growth at all costs.
Absolutely. These parks need to be designed with sustainability as a top priority from day one.
I'm also thinking about the social and economic impacts, What about the smaller players in the industry? Could they get squeezed out?
That's definitely a valid concern. Policymakers would need to think carefully about that. Maybe there could be ways to support those smaller players, help them integrate into these parks, or make sure they can still compete.
It's about finding that balance, right?
Exactly. Promoting growth, fostering innovation, but doing it in a way that's inclusive, that benefits everyone, and doesn't harm the environment. The report itself acknowledges this. These parks, they're not a magic solution. They're a tool, a potential tool. But they need careful planning, thoughtful implementation.
So lots of potential, but also potential pitfalls. A lot to think about. This whole deep dive, it's been really insightful. We've covered so much ground, from global trends to the nitty-gritty details of India's MMF industry.
It's a complex landscape, but a fascinating one. And the report does a great job of breaking it down, highlighting both the challenges and the opportunities.
And leaving us with some big questions to ponder, like the future of these mega MMF textile parks.
Right. Will they be the key to unlocking India's MMF potential? Only time will tell.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
It's been a pleasure. Always great to delve into these topics.
We encourage all of you listening to keep exploring, keep learning, keep diving deep into the issues that spark your curiosity. Until next time.